The gleaming halls of the Galactic Medical Academy stretched into the distance, their pearly white surfaces reflecting the light of 3 moons through the crystal dome above. It was the first day of the new term, and among the hundreds of alien students floating, crawling, and gliding their way to class, one figure stood out simply by walking on 2 legs. Tom adjusted the strap of his medical bag as he made his way through the entrance hall. At 6 feet tall, he towered over most of the other students. His solid frame and quick movements made several nearby aliens flinch away, their delicate tentacles and fragile appendages pulling close to their bodies. "Attention, students," a melodic voice echoed through the hall. "Please proceed to the main auditorium for the welcome ceremony." Tom followed the stream of students, careful not to bump into anyone. 5 years as a paramedic on Earth hadn't prepared him for how fragile everyone else in the galaxy seemed to be. The Academy's acceptance letter had warned him about this, marking humans as Class 12 Deathworlders and including a lengthy list of safety protocols. The auditorium was a vast chamber with seats designed to accommodate dozens of different body types. Tom found a human-compatible chair near the back, noticing how the nearest seats remained emptied despite the room filling up quickly. A tall, willowy alien with silver skin floated onto the stage. "Dean Light of Knowledge," according to the orientation package. "Welcome, future healers," the dean's voice resonated through the chamber. "Today marks a historic moment for our institution. For the first time, we have students from every recognized medical tradition in the galaxy, including—" There was a slight pause. "Our first student from Earth." A wave of whispers swept through the audience. Hundreds of eyes, sensors, and other sensory organs turned toward Tom. He sat straight, trying to look as non-threatening as possible. "I remind everyone that the Academy's mission is to learn from all traditions of healing," the dean continued, "even those that evolved in challenging environments." After the ceremony, Tom headed to his first class, Basic Xenophysiology. The classroom was arranged in small groups, and he found himself seated with 3 other students. The closest one, a floating blue sphere with delicate tendrils, drifted slightly away from him. "Don't worry," Tom said softly. "I know how to control my strength." He had practiced this line, hoping it would help break the ice. The blue sphere wobbled slightly, their species equivalent of nodding. "I am blue waves in morning," it said in a musical tone. "We have heard stories about Earth. Most of them probably make us sound pretty scary," Tom replied with a gentle smile. A crystalline being at their table chimed in, its faceted surface catching the light. "Is it true that humans can survive having their bodies cut open and sewn back together?" "That's called surgery," Tom explained. "It's pretty common where I'm from. My sister had her appendix removed last year." The third student, a gelatinous form with swirling patterns, rippled in what Tom's cultural training suggested was shock. "But the pain, the trauma." "We have anesthesia," Tom said, "and humans heal pretty quickly. It's not as bad as it sounds." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the professor, a multi-limbed being who moved with careful precision. "Today," the professor announced, "we begin understanding how different evolutionary pressures shaped medical needs across species." Tom pulled out his tablet, ready to take notes. He couldn't help but notice how his classmates kept glancing at him throughout the lecture, especially when the professor discussed extreme regenerative capabilities and high-gravity adaptations. By the end of the day, Tom had managed to have several more conversations with his classmates. Some even seemed curious rather than frightened, asking questions about human medicine and Earth. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As he walked back to his quarters that evening, Tom felt more optimistic. Yes, he was different. Yes, his methods might seem strange or even frightening to others. But he was here to learn, and maybe, just maybe, he had something valuable to teach as well. He had no idea how soon those lessons would be needed. 2 weeks had passed since Tom's arrival at the Galactic Medical Academy. The initial fear of his classmates had slowly begun to fade, though many still kept a safe distance from the human. Today's class was Advanced Emergency Response, and the laboratory was filled with various medical simulation devices. Professor Gentletouch was demonstrating the proper way to handle a cardiac emergency for different species. The professor's 6 arms moved with incredible slowness, showing the traditional galactic approach to emergency care. Remember, the professor hummed, "All medical procedures must be performed with ultimate gentleness. The patient's comfort is our highest priority." Tom watched from his station, trying not to show his concern at how long each procedure took. On Earth, every second counted in an emergency. Here, some life-saving procedures seemed to take hours. Blue Waves in Morning, who had become somewhat friendly with Tom, floated nearby. The blue sphere had started asking more questions about human medicine, though always with a mix of horror and fascination. "Is it true," Blue whispered, "that humans sometimes restart hearts by hitting the chest?" Before Tom could answer, a commotion erupted across the room. Crystal Song, one of their crystalline classmates, had suddenly stopped glowing. The normal rainbow patterns that flowed through their faceted body were dimming rapidly. "Oh my!" Professor Gentletouch exclaimed. Everyone remained calm. "We must begin the standard emergency protocol." The professor started laying out delicate instruments, preparing for the traditional 30-minute preparation sequence. Tom's paramedic training kicked in. He had studied crystalline physiology, and this looked exactly like a critical energy disruption, their equivalent of cardiac arrest. Without treatment, Crystal Song would shatter in minutes. "They don't have time for the protocol," Tom said, already moving. The other students scattered as he rushed forward, his quick movements causing ripples of alarm through the classroom. Crystal Song's light was almost gone now. Tom reached for the emergency energy modulator on the wall, standard equipment in all academy rooms. In human hands, the delicate device looked like a toy. "Stop!" Several students cried out. "You'll shatter them." Professor Gentletouch raised several arms in alarm. "Student Tom, we must follow proper." Tom had already placed the modulator against Crystal Song's core surface. With precise movements that would have shocked his classmates if they knew how much strength he was controlling, he sent carefully measured pulses of energy through the device. The classroom fell silent. Even the air circulation seemed to pause. Crystal Song's surface suddenly blazed with light. The rainbow patterns returned in a rush, swirling chaotically at first, then settling into normal rhythms. Several students had to adjust their optical sensors from the brightness. "Energy patterns stabilizing," Tom reported, falling back on his paramedic training. "Core resonance returning to normal parameters." He kept the modulator in place, monitoring the readings carefully. The other students stared in stunned silence. Professor Gentletouch floated nearby, all 6 arms frozen in mid-gesture. Nobody had ever seen an energy modulator used so decisively. Crystal Song's consciousness returned gradually. Their surface rippled in confusion. What happened?" "You experienced an energy cascade failure," Professor Gentletouch explained, finally finding their voice. "And Student Tom intervened. You saved me." Crystal Song's voice chimed with surprise. "But it was so fast. I didn't even feel any discomfort." "Sometimes fast is better," Tom said quietly, still monitoring the readings. "In emergencies, every moment counts." The professor drifted closer, examining Crystal Song carefully. "Most irregular," they muttered. "Most irregular indeed, but undeniably effective." The other students began whispering among themselves. Some still looked horrified at the speed and decisiveness of Tom's actions. Others showed signs of reluctant interest. Blue Waves in Morning drifted closer than ever before. "Perhaps," the professor finally announced, "we should discuss alternative approaches to emergency care. It seems our Deathworlder student has something to teach us after all." Tom carefully replaced the energy modulator on the wall, aware that this incident would change everything. He just hoped it would change things for the better. Word of Tom's emergency intervention spread through the academy like wildfire. By the next morning, the entire medical board had assembled for an emergency review. Tom sat in the center of a large circular chamber, surrounded by floating platforms holding the most distinguished medical professionals from across the galaxy. Dean Light of Knowledge's voice echoed through the chamber. "We are here to review the actions taken by student Tom during yesterday's incident. Never in the Academy's history has emergency care been administered with such intensity." Tom sat straight in his chair, trying to project calm confidence. 5 senior medical professionals floated before him, their various appendages and sensory organs focused entirely on him. The chamber was packed with observers, including many of his classmates. Crystal Song gleamed brightly in the front row, their rainbow patterns showing strong support. "Please explain your reasoning for ignoring standard emergency protocols," one board member asked, their tentacles writhing in distress. "Where I come from," Tom began carefully. "We have a saying, time is tissue. Every second without proper energy flow, or in human terms, blood flow, means more damage." The traditional 30-minute preparation sequence would have been too late. A ripple of murmurs spread through the chamber. Another board member, a being made of swirling gas, expanded in agitation. "But the force you used with the energy modulator. Our instruments recorded pressure levels that would shatter most species." "I studied crystalline physiology extensively," Tom explained. "Their outer layers are actually far more resilient than they appear. The real danger was in the core energy disruption. It's similar to cardiac arrest in humans. Gentle methods don't help if the patient dies while you're being careful." Blue Waves in Mourning suddenly floated forward. "Honored board, I witnessed everything." Student Tom's actions were swift but precise. There was no random violence, only efficient care. Professor Gentle Touch, who had been hovering quietly until now, moved forward. "I must concur. While the method was shocking by our standards, the results are undeniable." Crystal Song not only survived but showed no signs of trauma or distress. Crystal Song chimed in, their voice ringing clearly. "I feel better than ever. The humans' method was fast, yes, but more comfortable than our traditional treatments. I experienced no pain, no disorientation. Just life returned quickly." The board members conferred among themselves, their various appendages and sensory organs twitching and swaying. Tom waited patiently, remembering similar reviews after difficult calls back on Earth. Finally, Dean Light of Knowledge spoke again. "Student Tom, your methods challenge everything we know about proper medical care. Our traditions emphasize gentleness above all else because most galactic species are fragile. But perhaps—" The Dean paused, their silver skin rippling thoughtfully. "Perhaps we have something to learn from Deathworlder medicine." A collective gasp went through the chamber. Tom felt a weight lift from his shoulders. However, the Dean continued, "We must establish clear guidelines. You will work with Professor Gentle Touch to document your emergency response methods. We need to understand exactly when such decisive actions are appropriate." "Thank you," Tom said simply. "I'm happy to share everything I know." As the chamber began to empty, several students approached Tom. Even those who had previously avoided him now showed cautious interest. A small crystalline student asked, "Could you teach us how to use the energy modulator that way?" "Of course," Tom replied. "But first, you need to understand why speed matters in emergencies. It's not about being violent. It's about matching the treatment to the threat." Professor Gentle Touch drifted over, all 6 arms moving in complex patterns of thought. "Perhaps, Student Tom, you could give a special lecture on human emergency response techniques. With proper safety protocols, of course." Tom smiled. "I'd be honored, though I should warn you, human first aid techniques might seem a bit intense at first." After yesterday, Blue Waves in Mourning chimed in. "I think we're ready to learn, even if it scares us a little." Looking around at the curious faces and sensory organs turned toward him, Tom realized that his violent response had opened a door. Now he just had to help his fellow students find the courage to walk through it. 1 week after the emergency hearing, Tom stood in front of a packed classroom. The Academy had given him permission to teach a special seminar on human emergency medical techniques. Students from all years had come to learn, their curiosity finally overcoming their fear. Today, Tom began, standing next to a medical dummy that could change its form to match different species. We'll learn about the concept of the golden hour. Blue waves in morning, now acting as Tom's teaching assistant, floated nearby. They had helped set up various emergency medical tools around the room. The blue sphere had become surprisingly enthusiastic about human medical practices after seeing their effectiveness. In human emergency medicine, Tom continued, we believe the first 60 minutes after an injury or medical emergency are critical. The care given during this time can mean the difference between life and death. A tentacled student raised an appendage. But isn't it better to prepare properly? Our traditional methods require careful setup to avoid any discomfort. Sometimes, Tom replied, picking up an energy modulator. A few moments of discomfort are better than death. Let me show you why. He adjusted the dummy to mirror crystalline physiology, similar to crystal song species. When core energy patterns fail, you have about 3 minutes before permanent damage begins. The traditional 30-minute preparation sequence would be 27 minutes too late. Crystal Song chimed in from the front row. They had become a strong supporter of Tom's methods since their own emergency. Tom nodded. Exactly. Now, watch carefully. He demonstrated the quick but precise movements needed to use the energy modulator effectively. It's not about being rough or violent. It's about being decisive and quick while still being precise. The students watched with a mixture of fascination and anxiety as Tom showed them how to check different vital signs quickly, how to position patients for emergency care, and how to modify human techniques for different alien physiologies. During the practical portion of the class, many students were hesitant to apply the techniques with the speed Tom suggested. A gaseous student accidentally dispersed themselves 3 times trying to move quickly enough. But slowly, they began to understand. Think of it like this, Tom explained, helping a multi-limbed student position their appendages correctly. If your friend was falling off a cliff, would you grab them quickly or spend time planning the gentlest way to catch them? But that's different, protested a floating crystal student. That's an emergency. Exactly, Tom smiled. That's what we're preparing for. Emergencies, times when being too gentle could cost a life. Professor Gentletouch, who had been observing from the back of the room, drifted forward. I must admit, watching these demonstrations has changed my perspective. While our traditional methods excel for planned procedures, perhaps we have been too hesitant in true emergencies. As the class continued, Tom noticed a change in the students. Their movements became more confident, their questions more practical. Even those who had initially recoiled at the violent techniques began to see the logic behind them. Near the end of the session, Blue Waves in Morning demonstrated a modified version of CPR adapted for their species. The gentle sphere managed to perform the emergency techniques while maintaining their natural grace, showing others that speed didn't have to mean clumsiness. Remember, Tom said as the class ended, these techniques aren't about being aggressive. They're about being effective. Every species in this room evolved different ways to survive. Humans just evolved in a place where sometimes survival meant acting fast. Crystal Song's voice chimed in agreement. And sometimes, the fastest method is actually the kindest. I would rather face a moment of forceful help than hours of gentle dying. As the students filed out, many of them practicing quick movements with their various appendages, Tom felt a sense of accomplishment. The fear in their eyes had been replaced by understanding. They might still see humans as dangerous Deathworlders, but now they were beginning to understand that sometimes a Deathworlder's approach had its advantages. Little did they know, their newfound skills would be tested sooner than anyone expected. The Academy's dining hall buzzed with unusual activity during lunch break. Tom sat at a table that was no longer empty. Instead, students of various species gathered around him, asking questions about human medicine. Even the floating gas clouds, usually the most distant from him, hovered nearby. "Tell us more about human healing," a crystalline student chimed. "How do you repair broken bones?" Tom pulled out his tablet and showed them an X-ray image. "Well, when humans break a bone, our body starts fixing it immediately. We use something called a cast to hold the bone in place while it heals." "You mean you don't use growth acceleration chambers?" Blue Waves in Morning asked, their surface rippling with surprise. "Nope, just a simple cast and time." Tom smiled. "Humans are pretty good at healing on their own. We evolved that way because Earth is, well, not very friendly." Professor Gentletouch drifted over to their table, all 6 arms carrying different medical devices. "Student Tom, would you be willing to demonstrate more emergency techniques this afternoon?" Several faculty members have expressed interest. "Of course," Tom replied. He noticed how the professor no longer flinched when he moved quickly. Progress was happening, slowly but surely. Later that day, Tom stood in the main lecture hall. The room was packed with students and teachers alike. Even Dean Light of Knowledge floated near the back, their silver skin gleaming with interest. "Today we'll talk about something that scares most species in the galaxy: human surgery." Tom activated a holographic display showing basic surgical procedures. "Yes, we actually cut people open to fix them." A collective shudder went through the audience. Blue Waves in Morning, now used to human methods, quickly added, "But they have ways to prevent pain." "Tell them about anesthesia." Tom spent the next hour explaining how humans had developed their medical techniques. He showed them how Earth's dangerous environment had forced humans to find fast, effective ways to deal with injuries. The aliens were shocked to learn that humans had practiced medicine for thousands of years before developing space travel. "You mean you were doing surgery before you had healing chambers?" a gaseous student asked, swirling in disbelief. "We still do," Tom explained. "Sometimes the old ways work best. Not every problem needs advanced technology to fix it." Crystal Song, who had become one of Tom's strongest supporters, floated forward. "I've been studying human medical records," they chimed. "Their methods seem brutal, but their survival rates are impressive. Sometimes they save patients we would consider lost causes." The dean's voice echoed from the back of the room. "Perhaps that is why the galaxy needs both approaches: the gentle touch of traditional healing and the decisive methods of Earth." Tom nodded. Every species developed medical techniques that matched their needs. Humans needed to act fast because our world was dangerous. Your species developed gentler methods because they worked best for you. A small tentacled student raised an appendage. "Could you teach us how to tell when to use each approach? When to be gentle and when to be human?" "That's exactly what we need to learn," Tom said. "Every patient is different. Every emergency is unique. The trick is knowing which method will save the most lives." As the session ended, Tom noticed something remarkable. The students were no longer dividing themselves by species as they left the room. Instead, they formed mixed groups, discussing different medical approaches and sharing ideas. Professor Gentletouch approached Tom after the others had left. "You've started something interesting here, Student Tom. A mixing of methods that could change galactic medicine forever." "I hope so," Tom replied, "because I have a feeling that someday someone's life might depend on knowing both ways to heal." The professor's appendages waved in agreement. "Indeed, and that day might come sooner than we think." Little did either of them know how prophetic those words would prove to be. The Academy's cafeteria was busier than usual during the afternoon break. Students of all species gathered to eat, study, and practice their new medical skills. Tom sat with his usual group, watching with pride as Blue Waves in Morning demonstrated a modified version of human first aid techniques to some younger students. "Remember," Blue was saying, "speed doesn't mean panic. It means purposeful action." Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the cafeteria. A gaseous student had collapsed, their normally swirling form starting to dissipate dangerously. The familiar signs of a containment field failure were clear, one of the most dangerous emergencies for gaseous species. In the past, such an emergency would have caused panic and a slow, careful response. But today was different. Before Tom could even stand up, Crystal Song was already moving. Their crystalline form glided swiftly to the emergency containment field generators mounted on the wall. With precise movements that would have seemed shockingly fast just a few weeks ago, they activated the device. "Clear the area," Crystal Song chimed loudly, their voice carrying the authority Tom had taught them to use in emergencies. Containment field coming online. Blue waves in mourning floated quickly to assist, their tentacles moving with controlled urgency. Beginning emergency field modulation. Everyone maintained distance. Tom watched in amazement as his students worked. They moved with the speed of human emergency responders, but maintained their own natural grace. The containment field sprang to life, its energy patterns carefully calibrated to match the gaseous student's normal density. "Field strength at maximum," Crystal Song reported calmly. Beginning particle reintegration. Professor Gentletouch had arrived by now, but instead of taking over, they watched with all 6 arms clasped in amazement. The traditional response to such an emergency would have taken precious minutes to set up. By then, the gaseous student might have dissipated beyond recovery. Vital signs stabilizing. Blue waves in mourning announced, monitoring the readings. Density returning to normal parameters. The gathered crowd watched in stunned silence as the gaseous student's form slowly condensed back into its normal swirling patterns. There was no panic, no chaos, just the efficient, quick response Tom had taught them, adapted perfectly for alien physiology. Dean Light of Knowledge arrived just as the emergency was ending. "What is this?" they asked, their silver skin rippling with surprise. "I've never seen a containment failure handled so quickly." "We used a combination of methods," Crystal Song explained, their voice proud but respectful. "The speed of human emergency response, but adapted for our traditional equipment. Student Tom taught us that we don't have to choose between being fast and being careful." The gaseous student, now fully stabilized, swirled with gratitude. "I felt no pain," they announced in surprise. The field modulation was swift, but perfectly calibrated. "I didn't think such a thing was possible." Professor Gentletouch drifted forward, all 6 arms moving in excited patterns. "This is remarkable. You've managed to combine the best aspects of both medical traditions, the precision of our methods with the urgency of human techniques." Tom finally spoke up. "They did it all on their own. I just showed them it was possible." Blue waves in mourning floated closer to Tom. "You taught us more than that. You showed us that different doesn't mean wrong. That sometimes the best way to help someone is to challenge what we think we know." The dean's voice carried across the cafeteria. "I believe we are witnessing the birth of a new approach to emergency medicine, one that could benefit all species in the galaxy." As the crowd began to disperse, Tom noticed something remarkable. The older students who hadn't taken his classes were now approaching Crystal Song and Blue Waves in Mourning, asking to learn the new techniques. The fear of violent human methods was being replaced by a recognition of their value. But more importantly, his students had proved that they could make these methods their own. They hadn't just copied human techniques, they had transformed them into something new, something that worked for everyone. The revolution in galactic medicine had begun, and it started with a simple willingness to learn from a Deathworlder. 3 months had passed since the cafeteria incident. The Galactic Medical Academy's main hall was decorated for a special ceremony. Students from all species gathered to witness something unprecedented, the official integration of human emergency medical techniques into the Academy's standard curriculum. Tom stood on the stage next to Dean Light of Knowledge, watching as his first class of students demonstrated their new skills. Blue Waves in Mourning led a team showing how different species could work together in emergencies, combining the best of both worlds. "When I first arrived," Tom began his speech, looking out at the gathered crowd, "most of you were afraid to sit near me. You thought human medical techniques were violent and dangerous." Crystal Song chimed in from their position near the front. We didn't understand that sometimes the fastest way could be the kindest way. The dean's silver skin rippled with approval as they addressed the audience. Today, we celebrate not just new medical techniques, but a new understanding. The galaxy has long viewed Earth as a dangerous place that produced dangerous beings. But now we see that those same challenges created solutions we never imagined. Professor Gentle Touch demonstrated with their 6 arms how traditional gentle movements could be made quicker without losing precision. It's not about choosing between human methods or traditional ways, they explained. It's about knowing when to use each approach. Tom watched as teams of students performed emergency simulations, a crystalline being worked smoothly with a gaseous form, their movements quick but careful. A multi-limbed student helped a floating sphere practice modified CPR techniques. The fear that had once filled the room was gone, replaced by confidence and purpose. The most important lesson, Tom continued, wasn't about speed or strength. It was about understanding that different environments create different solutions. Humans learn to act quickly because our world demanded it. Your species developed gentle techniques because they worked best for you. But together, we've created something better than either approach alone. Blue waves in morning floated forward to share their experience. I remember being terrified of human methods. Now, I understand that what looks violent to one species might be exactly what another needs to survive. We've learned to see past our fears to focus on what really matters, saving lives. The dean activated a large holographic display showing medical statistics from the past 3 months. Emergency survival rates had improved dramatically across all species. Treatment times were shorter, recovery rates higher, and most surprisingly, patient comfort levels had actually increased. By combining the precision of traditional methods with the urgency of human techniques, the dean announced, "We've created a new standard for emergency care. From today forward, all Academy students will learn both approaches." Tom felt a surge of pride as he watched his original students now teaching others. Crystal Song was explaining emergency energy modulation to a group of younger crystals. Blue Waves in Morning had become an expert in adapting human techniques for different physiologies. Even the most delicate species have found ways to incorporate faster responses into their care. But perhaps the most valuable lesson, Tom concluded, is that being different doesn't mean being wrong. Every species in this room evolved to survive in their own environment. By learning from each other, we all become stronger. As the ceremony ended, students gathered in mixed groups, practicing their skills and sharing stories. The old barriers between species had broken down. Deathworlder and non-Deathworlder worked side by side, each learning from the other's strengths. Professor Gentle Touch approached Tom after the ceremony. "You've changed more than just our medical practices, student Tom. You've changed how we see each other.